Now let's take a look at maybe how we could, again, with a few steps as possible, create maybe a small structure onto the rubber part of our wheel. And it's actually very easy to do. So in case you moved your 3D cursor anywhere else, select your wheel and then press Shift S to snap my cursor to the selected object. And then you see the 3D cursor is repositioned. You can press Shift A and add a cube. Go into edit mode and scale with S this cube down. And then we're going to move it up and scale it down a little bit more. Actually, I do it along the y-axis in my case, and then move it down. And then let's go into a 3D view, because this is a little bit too wide, so S and X. And then in this case, I create 2 loop cuts. And then I'm going to move those points down, kind of like this. And actually, maybe I add 2 more loop cuts there, and then I only select the upper points. Actually, I can select the loops as well and just adjust this a little bit so that it gets a little bit rounder. Okay, so you see that I somewhat tried to mimic the curvature of that wheel and make it stick out a little bit. Okay, that's fine. So now I actually would like this part, and let me give this a different color so it's highlighted. I would like this orange element to be replicated over the surface of my wheel. And Blender has an array tool, so we can go to the modifier, add modifier, say array, and then you can have a different offset and different counts. You see that it's duplicating it, and you have an offset along, for example, the x-axis and an offset along the y-axis. This, for example, is very, very useful for architectural modeling if you need to create something kind of like stairs, because Blender replicates each stair or step for you. But that's not really what we need. So I set this one all to 0, and let's set this one to 2. Because what I rather would like to do is to spin this part, and while spinning, duplicate it along or around that wheel. So again, I have to make sure my 3D cursor is perfectly positioned. It should not be off. So with my part selected, I Shift S and then select cursor to selected. And then there's going to be a new element for you. I can press Shift A, go to empty, and then select plane axis. And an empty is nothing else than a 3D element in space, kind of like a point, that's all. And it has scale and rotation information as well. Inside my object menu, I can click the empty icon and maybe say the scale should be 0.1, 0.001. That's too small, so 0.01. Okay, so that's that scale is pretty good. It's easier to work with. And for example, inside the property panel under empty, the item, empty makes sense, but maybe I want to call this one empty wheel, so it's easier to identify. Then I can select my geometry piece, which should be replicated over the wheel. Go to the array modifier. And here I have a button that says object offset. And then if I click in here, I can type in empty, and then it finds my empty. I can select it, and nothing really happens. But if I select my empty and in a side view press R, so I rotate it along the x-axis, you see with the amount I'm rotating this empty, the second array piece is moved. So let's say we have 10, and then I select my empty and rotate it. You see that each array element is rotated, for example right now, by 8.45 degrees evenly. So what this can be very useful for example, I set it to 2, and then I make a nearly full 360-degree turn, and maybe try to eyeball it. Let's say like this. So this nearly looks like 356 degrees. So basically that's 4 degrees. Then I could go and say 360 divided by 4. That tells me 90. So inside count, I can type in 90. And now it takes 90 elements and basically rotates it by -4 degrees. And then this way it fills it out. And you see if I change my rotation here, so if I type in -4, then I have now this structure put over it. So the amount of degrees you rotate the empty, you have to think about the steps. Then use that degree value and divide 360 by it, and then the number you get are the number of elements you need. And the nice part is I still only am dealing with this one single object. So I could go ahead maybe in a top view and say, well, this cross section move forward, those two cross sections move backwards or also go forward. So you see that it's very, very easy to generate quickly kind of like a structure or pattern without too much work. I could maybe say, well, this is too bloggy, so maybe add a subsurface modifier. Well, okay, then everything is too far inside the wheel. So maybe here I have to adjust those points a little bit. And for example, now I feel like the space here is way too big in relationship to the width or the thickness of those elements. So I'm going back to say, count me in only 2 parts. Because what happens if I move it by 2 degrees. So that is okay. So then I go again, 360 divided by 2, of course, makes 180. So going back to my object, I can type in 180 steps, and then everything is filled in again. And then I can continue sculpting everything a little bit, maybe in this case make it a little bit thinner, and maybe those points move down a notch as well. And I could also go ahead and say, well, this part maybe delete, and here I'm filling in the missing faces, and press F to fill the faces. So for example, now I only have left and right. So you see, it doesn't really matter what mesh you put in there, because it just replicates or erase that stuff along a circular orientation. And that's the process how you could quickly create a structure like this on a wheel.